Meaning is relationship, and knowledge gestates within the womb of context. To invalidate and devalue the subjective quality of one's own perception by elevating objectivity denies the reality of the subject. Stripping away context may mitigate the potential of biases infiltrating one's findings, but without that context, then the finding becomes an island within the midst of a misty ocean. It denies meaning to the individual's life, and this establishes a vacuum that can be exploited and generates its own natural current of chaos. This is why our societies have entered a strange malaise, an affliction of the meaningless amidst the beauty of nature. Postmodernism fails, and all overly controlling ideologies fail, because they fundamentally cling to the Ahrimanic anchor that seeks conformity and orthodoxy, without the resistance from the right hemisphere of the serpent. Orion, Abraxas, Gilgamesh, Prince Yudhishthira, or Amraphel, Nimrod, are archetypal symbols of that divine third that brings eventual resolution to that chaotic two-third outgrowth of the material vessel and mind. It provides the vertical columns to the square, thus ensuring stability through the establishment of one's will through knowledge. The Tragic Aleph Tav eclipse, as I call it, but some call it merely the Tragic eclipse, the Great American Solar Eclipse, which, funnily enough, is 3, or rather 4 eclipses that began within 2017 on August the 21st, roughly, and that eclipse cycle shall be concluded in 2024, April 8th, right, on April 8th. So, as we see within this map image, it forms the Aleph, and it forms the Tav. The Aleph and Tav, which is the beginning and the end. There was a contraction in the beginning, and there shall be a contraction in the end, right? The contraction obviously was a rebellion, the American Revolution, and right at the end of the American or Anglo-American Empire shall be a contraction, an internalized self-destructive spirit that shall externalize itself in a physical and kinetic form. It shall destroy. And obviously right at the end shall be a contraction as well. A contraction of the Anglo-American Empire, a contraction of its sphere of influence, a contraction of its moral fibre, a contraction of its social landscape, a contraction economically and what have you, across the entirety of the Anglo-American society, the West. There will be a total unabridged collapse, and there is. It's happening. We see it. We witness it with our very eyes. And the collapse has occurred within the minds of people. That is where collapses first begin. They don't outwardly externalize themselves until the internal chemistry, the internal landscape of the population, if you will, psycho-spiritually or psychosocially, has become so maladjusted, has become so demonstrably self-destructive. Only then, once that collapse is set in within the internal alchemy of the person and of the population collectively, then it will externalize into a kinetic collapse. They know this. This is all engineered. Absolutely. All of this is engineered. This is their ritual to move eastward, right? This is rotational human farming. They farm this field, right? The field of the West, and they shall move eastward, right? Because they have left that field fallow for quite some time. It has regenerated its population, it has regenerated its resources, it is ready to be seeded once again by the formula of Satir, Repo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. He who is without knowledge of good or evil turns the wheel with manipulation, right? Or tills the soil and plants the human crop. And of course, once the cattle is fat, then it is taken to slaughter. And as you notice as well, interestingly, it looks very much like a pentagram, right? The two prongs of the pentagram right at the top. Of course, the pentagram is the inversion of the pentacle, which is a symbol of man, right? I mean, we ourselves are the pentacle. We are 5 points, 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head, which is obviously the receptacle of the spirit. Now, interestingly, obviously the pentagram, what we see there, that prong, the left hand prong of the 2 prongs of the pentagram, again the inverted pentacle, what we find is that is between the New Madrid fault line, the Balcones fault line, and the Cascadia subduction zone, that primary triangle of the Aleph Tav eclipses, or the intersection of 3 fault lines, or the Great American Solar Eclipse, or eclipses rather, that actually forms the point of the fire. So the fire is the paradoxical force which is seen at the beginning of the zodiac through Aries, right? And again, remember, the beginning is the end. That is the constellation which Orion, or man himself, right, the true essence of man. And of course, his journey down the Eridanus is man's journey through the world. It's man's descent, right, to then understand who he is, right? Spiritual involution leading to conscious evolution, as Carl Jung stated. So that is the constellation which Orion was to reach by killing the bull of heaven, or the Taurus, right? So what we understand by that is you have to destroy Earth, or Taurus, which is a sign of Earth, to thus have a great reset, right, if you will. This is seen, for example, within the constellation of Pisces. Naturally, in essence, you have 2 axes, one that is vertical and one that is horizontal. Obviously, that links to what Steiner would call Lucifer and Ahriman, or the polarities of evil. And, of course, the hypotenuse between the two, or the Pythagorean theorem of C equals the square root of a squared plus b squared, that is the resolution. That is the Christ, or the Krishna. It is that of Orion, right? Who has peered into the Grail, who has peered into the mirror, who understands the paradoxical yet divine and intersectional nature of himself while upon the terrestrial plane, and obviously beyond it. So what we see, for example, with the Pleiades and Taurus, the Pleiades is that which sits above, vertically above Taurus. The vertical is that which is imposing, it's authoritative, it's even terrifying, right? It is that which puts up boundaries, fences, walls. All of these are points of demarcation for property, right? They're that which destroys the equality of the horizontal plane, right? So one is of conformity, the vertical, and one is of freedom, right? Or one is of the freedom would be associated with Lucifer, the horizontal, and the vertical is associated with Ahriman, right? Or even you could say time, in the conformist or forceful or even coercive aspect of it, right? The tyrant. So what we see is the Pleiades is fear, right? It's that which towers over man, constantly looms over him, attempts to belittle him, to maintain him within the confines of the pen. And of course, the horizon, right, the horizontal plane, with the horizons either side, it provides man the illusion of the infinite, right? But it keeps him upon the hamster wheel, right? It does not matter how far you travel to the horizon. You will never reach the horizon, right? This is the issue with freedom, right? If you pursue freedom, you will eventually run out of steam, because you will never reach that purity of freedom. The world itself obviously impedes one's freedom, right? It impedes one's life. If freedom is anything, then it is the right to life. And of course, you don't really have the right to life within this world. Ultimately, at any point you may die. The only certainty in this world is death. Thus, this world, it is not predicated on freedom. It doesn't have freedom as a primary tenet at its crux, right? That is something man carves out from the world of chaos. It is the illusion of order, right? And interestingly enough, that this is the sort of Luciferian or the Promethean idea wrapped up in the technological artifices that man constantly pursues. And the problem is technology is born from chaos. For example, all the way back to fire. Fire is produced artificially, or in a specific localized sense, vis-a-vis friction, chaos, right? Man utilizing the dialectic, right? The sort of triadic generative formula of creation. Specifically, in terms of fire, it's the ignition, the fuel, and obviously oxygen, which produces fire. Again, the generative symbol. In terms of words, ideas, even programmatic language, which is at the basis of AI, how is that produced? Well, it is all born of language. It's all born of the modulation of thought, the quantizing of thought into word, which itself is artificial. And of course, there's a certain latency in language, meaning that there's a loss, there's a limitation of the pure imagistic quality, and even beyond the imagistic nature of thought. That which we tap into, imagination, thought, it's not something that probably derives from the mind, but it's something the mind probably taps into as an antenna. When it is processed through the mind into language, and then obviously it comes out of the larynx and the vocal cords, the voice box. The larynx, of course, like the tetractys of the abracadabra, which can be a tetractys is a pyramid with 10 layers, and of course the word itself that is fitted into this pyramid is broken down into these 10 layers, right? That obviously links with the Sephiroth and is a numerical marker of the cycle, of a full cycle, right? All the integers back to 1, right? The confines, and that which is beyond the confines, the zero, the nothing, that which is valueless but is also in and of itself a value. So anyway, that comes through the larynx, which is a triangle, right? It is a triangle. We co-create with God. We generate within the world. We produce chaos, destroy the balance of the world vis-a-vis the generative symbol of the triangle and vis-a-vis chaos itself. So that is why technology, the Promethean flame, will always lead to chaos. It will always lead to despotism, tyranny, to the destruction of man. Because at its very basis is it artificiation based around chaos. It is the artificial generation of chaos. That is what technology is. Digressing. And of course, if that is on a civilizational scale, meaning the civilization is predicated upon pursuing that endless horizon of freedom, then what inevitably will happen is the civilization will run out of steam. The culture will run out of steam. And when that happens, people see that, well, the horizon did not provide us endless, bountiful freedom, but all it provided us were the extremities, the confines, right, the parameters of a pen. They understand that it is an illusion, and then once that point is reached, then obviously the Luciferian spirit makes way for the Ahrimanic, the horizontal makes way for the vertical, the hunter-gatherer makes way for the sedentary serf. So that is essentially what we see in terms of that idea of Orion linked with the Tauros, and obviously the Tauros is presided over by the vertical Pleiades that looms over it, or the Seven Sisters. Right. That will all appear in several books that I'm going to do, and of course I'll make them into audiobooks and videos eventually. If you wish for me to dedicate more time to this, obviously I work in a construction site, so I do 10-hour shifts, plus I'm doing all of this. If you provide me cash, I can then dedicate more time, because I'm self-employed in the construction site, I can then dedicate more time to this. Obviously, I still have to eat and keep a roof over my head, unfortunately. And with inflation, I'm sort of forced to work. It's not like I want to. Believe you me, I'm absolutely bored out my mind on a construction site. It's certainly not somewhere I want to spend the rest of my life, or somewhere I want to dedicate any energy to. I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth as opposed to a silver spoon, so, I was given nothing. And everything that I have got up to this point, I've had to fight tooth and nail for. Because in this world, you're either predator or prey. And of course, you can explain away your situation, but you can never excuse it. So I was always, of course, cognizant of that as well. I'm not asking for donations. It's only if you can have the means to provide anything, then you can donate. You don't have to. I'll still produce this content. It'll just be at a slower pace, of course. Digressing. In essence, Ordo ab Chao is approaching. Although, of course, it is how they maintain their system of power. This Ordo ab Chao, this formula. But this time, it shall be global, and it will be simultaneous. Now, of course, they've done this before. This is all cyclical. However, what we're bringing to the fore here is that this is the end of the Anglo-American Empire, right? And it's ritualistically being set up that way. Of course, the Tav is also the X. That is in the Phoenician alphabet. So that also links as well to the Niva Dikpala, which is an 8-rayed star. In the center is Shiva, the rainbow. Of course, the rainbow is a symbol of destruction, because Shiva means destruction. It is the Parabrahma aspect of destruction, or creative destruction in this sense. Again, Ordo ab Chao. So the 8-rayed star, you have the 4 cardinal directions of the cross of matter, or the horizontal line intersecting with the vertical, similar to the crucifix and this idea of Christ. However, you also have the other 4 diagonally intersecting lines, which again form the Tav or the X. Those correspond with the royal stars of Persia: Aldebaran, Regulus, Antares, and Fomalhaut, right? I won't get into it here, but I have a book that I will release. I'm releasing quite a slew of them right now, where it will discuss this, right? It will actively discuss the meaning behind this, but it links to the summer and winter triangles, right? And the distinction between those two, and again the intersection of symbolism between them as well, and what it means within the mystery religion that rule the world, right? Those, of course, are also called in modern astrology as the 4 fixed signs. So those correspond with Taurus, Aquarius, Leo, Scorpio. Again, I'll discuss the importance of that, but this goes all, I mean, you can trace that all the way back to Pashupati, right? The Lord of all animals. Essentially the Lord at the centre of that Nevadic Pala, right? Shiva. Of course, Pashupati was another epithet of Shiva. Some have even stated that it may have been a proto-Shivaic deity, which I mean, that is unquestionable, I would state. However, continuing on, the hemispheric Ouroboros of the mind, the great battle between that demiurgic aspect, which seeks to control the thalamus, or the inner chamber, and that which seeks to rebel against the thalamus, the seat of God's representative fractal here upon earth, is what maintains the equilibrium of motion within existence. The thalamus is heaven, that which is beyond the spinal column, the pillar of earth, right? The pillar is a symbol of earth itself, which is, of course, why you have the likes of Zion, which is a composite word composed of two words. You have Sia in the Hebrew, which means barren land, a desert essentially. And you have On, which is the Hebraic translation, or version rather, of the ancient Egyptian word for Heliopolis, right? Their native name for Heliopolis, which was Iunu. Literally it means pillar, right? Pillar. It's a tetragrammaton, funnily enough. It means pillar. So, again, the holy pillar of the barren land, that is what Zion means. The holy pillar of the barren land. Again, it's discussing this idea of, if we understand, the pillar is the earth, right? The holy earth, right? The garden, right, of the barren land. You could think of that like the void. You could think of that like a field that has just been harvested, right? It's discussing the Ouroboros, essentially. That is what Zion is. That is what this idea of Zionism is as well, right? It is that notion that to maintain this garden of the Demiurgos, this Lord of the Earth, this Enki, Saturn, of course you can view these Lords of the Earth as a sort of commingling between the forces or aspects of Saturn and Mercury, the forces of the subterranean, of time, and of course of death, and the conductor of death, and of commerce as well. Existence is comprised of the infernal body's perception of that which is external to it, and the mind's internal acknowledgement of the higher unconscious element of that fractal of the first principle. The West's erotic fixation with objectivity has produced a society that is blind and, in place of truth and God, places hallucination and the delusion that man's void-filled intelligence can dominate and re-envision the world. This is tied to, yet in diametric conflict, with the Luciferian or serpentine right hemisphere that provided man with his imagination of reality, colouring his non-verbal and imagistic sense of reality, where the egregores that fill our mind pour out into reality. This is the madness that leads man to pursue ad infinitum the unreachable horizon that is truth, Mental insanity and spiritual blindness are what drive the world, the battle between the orthodox and heterodox. The West, built on the foundations of the heterodox, has become a draconian and thus demiurgic bastion of orthodoxy. This double reflection, one of many, these mutually complementary paradoxes, are what form the resolution of a consciousness. Its desire to elevate objectivity above subjective knowledge has created a society that resembles an entirely white-coloured padded room, a bizarre and devoid reality, designed by Yaldabaoth, the begetter of the void. He who is the, like Set, is the lord of the Desheret, the barren land, the begetter of the void that has engendered the disease of blindness and madness upon the involuted spirit of man, or the sleeping god. The two poles of the hemispheric divide, where the left sees conformity and the right seeks the spatial and imagistic freedom, the tyrant and traitor, the priest and heretic, desire and transition. The blind conjure, like the prisoner's cinema, their own forms upon the wall of the cave, the canvas of the void. Madness is spun from this, and the death and rebirth of God commences after the destruction of the society is concluded. The blind feel but cannot see, the grail that receives yet is inert, and the mad see but cannot make sense of the world, the libation that pours though is without a fixed form to act as a vessel for it. The resolution between the two is consciousness, that which finds the Holy Grail and sees its own reflection within its libation-filled vessel. Galahad, one of the three of the zodiacal knights of the Round Table to find the Grail, three being indicative of this trinity, and his name translates as the Falcon of Summer. Summer is that of Cancer, or Karkinos, the crab or lobster, and as we see upon the moon tarot card, the line established from the lobster of Cancer to the mountains, emblematic of the threshold sign of Capricorn, or the sea goat. Ultimately, it is one travelling from the zenith of one's temporal existence to that of the darkness of the twilight of one's said existence. That is where perspective is gained, and the hardships of winter, the darkness of its cold embrace, spurs on the realization of the peculiar condition of life and our destiny. Of course, as well, Karkinos or Cancer is under the sign of the moon. The moon is that gateway of oblivion, right? It is linked to the female womb. It is linked to the menstrual cycle. It's linked to the cycles of pregnancy. It's of course linked to time. Obviously the idea of the month, right? Month contains moon within its linguistic construction. And furthermore as well, from one moon to the next, or from one month to the next, is essentially one moon cycle to the next moon cycle. And of course, that links to 3 by the fact that, on average, each day of the month has 30 days. However, the sun reflects the moon's energy, if you will. And by that, it is more a metaphor. So if we understand the sun as the male aspect, that point of Chokmah, the wisdom, that phallus, then the moon, of course, is that which is inert without the sun's radiance, that it acts as a point of gestation, if you will, for the sun's energy, which it sacrifices, and thus that descends into the terrestrial realm. So thus, the moon is a reflection of the heavens. It reflects the energy of the heavens. Again, this is what is stated within the esoteric corpus, right? The falcon is also Horus, or he who overcomes the deeds of Set, the trapper and murderer of his father Osiris. You can think of Osiris as Orion. Orion, within his, once he goes upon the journey along the Eridanus, which is the sinusoidal wave, the current of time, he finds at the end of that, again, the same sort of tragic end, but funnily enough, it's the cup form. I believe it's the fornax, or between the constellations of the fornax, horologium, or the clock. Fornax is the furnace, the clock, and for the life of me, I forget the last one now. But it shows this sort of, this left-hand side, this feminine axis, a lunar axis, if you will, of a severity, of judgment, right? Of time. But funnily enough, to the right of time, or the horologium, that constellation, is the Phoenix, right? The Phoenix is Horus. The Phoenix is the falcon of summer. It's the falcon who, through traversing through the land of the dead, of the Kur, the underworld, much like a lot of this death and rebirth, ritualism and symbolism that we see throughout the esoteric corpus, it then is rebirthed, right? And of course the Phoenix within the Egyptian esoteric tradition, and just generally the religious tradition of Egypt as well, the Phoenix was seen as, or the Bennu bird really, was seen as a measure of time, right? It wasn't necessarily just a symbol of enlightenment. It was a measure of time, almost like aeons, right, or epochs. And of course, it states, the Thelemites state rather, that we're going into the Aeon of Horus, right? The Aeon of Horus. Now, of course, Horus is where we get our term for hour from, right? Again, it's linked to time as well. It doesn't go beyond time. It's very much linked to time. And it's the understanding that we see at the end of the Epic of Gilgamesh, that there is no escape. That it's wheels within wheels within wheels. Of course, something else linking to the Phoenix is the Flammarion, right? Which also links the flamingo. The scientific name for the Phoenix as well is the Phoenicopteridae. Of course, that's Latin, essentially, for phoenix, right? The phoenix bird. Flamingos you find absolutely everywhere. You're finding them absolutely everywhere right now, throughout all of media. Of course, Leave the World Behind, we saw them within that movie, we saw them within Barbie, I believe, and you saw, of course, the sort of magenta colour of the spiritual, right? Again, the red and blue combined produce the magenta, or they produce the purple, can even produce that sort of pinkish magenta colour too, right? So you can see why the flamingo is obviously linked to that, as a sort of symbol of enlightenment, a symbol of the renewal, the great reset, if you will, of the cycles of the world, a new aeon. And of course, we seem to be moving into this age of Aquarius, right? I'll detail the meaning behind that, but it underpins the Great Reset, essentially. There's multiple ways to describe this idea. But essentially, that age of Aquarius is the cup pourer, right? It's the water bearer. It is he who pours out the libation of heaven. Of course, God derives from the Proto-Indo-European etymology. An etymological verb derives from the Proto-Indo-European verb gua or gia, which means to pour, right? That is what God is. Again, to pour the currents of time, right? Like the Star Tarot card. The water is taken from the Omega pool by, again, the feminine axis of severity. Of course, you see the 8-rayed star, the Nevatic Pala, the guardians of the 9 directions. Of course, at the centre of those 8 rays is Shiva, right? Is destruction. What it's showing you on the Star Tarot card is from the Omega pool, from that which is both the beginning and the end, and even you could even describe it as the pre-beginning, right? It is beyond all of it. It is that which is contained within the vessels, right, which are then poured out. They descend to lower vibrational states. Of course, that is what you see throughout the cosmos. It is not necessarily evolution. It is more sort of an anti-centripetal force, almost akin to a centrifugal force, right? It doesn't necessarily just orbit the centripetal center, but it seeks to sort of move outwards, right? After each rotation, a bit like a spiral in many ways, only for it then to, after it reaches the end of time and thus contracts back, then it goes, it moves centripetally back to the center, back to that point of contraction, only to then contract again, and thus the cycle begins anew, right? I'm going to get into this and why that is the case, but your own consciousness, which is a reflection of the higher consciousness, of course, the higher point of consciousness does not have at its core that this concept or these limitations of the senses, right, and these limitations of the mind and all of that. We are essentially the intersection point, man is, of earth and heaven. Fundamentally, that's what we are. That is what Christ represented. That is the beauty within the archetype of Christ, within that view of the crucifix. Again, that intersection point that we can be both the Son of Man and the Son of God. It states that within Galatians 3:26, I do believe, right? We're all sons of God now, through our faith in Jesus Christ. So yes, ultimately, what we see of the astrological ages is it runs counterclockwise, it runs backwards, it's in reverse to what we see in the typical astrological zodiac, which goes Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on and so forth, all the way around to Pisces, which is the last. It's the final or lowest point of the zodiacal cycle. Why is that the case? Because obviously the fish within the Vedic concept of the subtle bodies is the lowest point of man, right? It is the lowest point of the infernal body, which is closest to earth. It's closest to Malkuth, the brown of the dirt, right? That symbol of the waste, the dust, from whence we were taken, or our vessels were taken, and to thence we will return. And of course that's seen within the Star Tarot card, the right hand, which establishes, right, that point of Yakin, the feminine axis of severity, pours out, right, again the contraction of birth, pours out our essence, right, the Shivrat HaKalim, or the shattering of the vessels, pours it out into the terrestrial plane, to the right, and then it drifts backwards into the Omega plane. And essentially what you're seeing there is the upper and lower rotations, right, or rotational points of the Ouroboros, right? These aren't things I can necessarily touch on in great detail within a video. I'm going to have lots of books out that are going to discuss these key concepts, but trying to touch upon all of these concepts, as you've probably noticed with the streams that I've done, is extremely difficult, because what I'm trying to discuss to you is every point of mythology, every point of symbolism, all of the semiotic overlaps, right? Because I have to discuss that, because if I don't discuss that, you won't get a full grasp of not just the concept, but my epistemology and how I arrived at that concept, right? How I arrived at the reality of it. So I'm not just showing you the destination, right? Because there really is no destination in this. What I'm showing you is the journey, the markers along my traversal of the road. So of course, each astrological cycle lasts 2,160 years. Of course, 2160 adds to 9. The Earth's axial tilt, or the wobble, it moves 1 arc degree every 72 years, right? Which of course factors into the 25,920 years of the precessional year, where the Earth moves between the North Star of Polaris to the North Star of Vega. Of course, 72, the reverse of that 27, within the Tetractys of Yahweh, the value we arrive at is, you guessed it, not 72 but 27. 72, 7 plus 2 equals 9. The value between 27 and 72 is of course 45. That's half of 90. 45 and 90, of course, that all adds to 9 too. That's denominational of 360, or it's a half of a half of a half of a half of a half, I believe. So again, 360, all of its halves. If you add the individual digits of those halves, those all add to 9, or they add to other digits, which added individually all add to 9, right? So 3, 6, and 9 are essentially the circular numbers. They're the numbers that consistently, without fail, circle back in on themselves. They're almost like the alpha and omega, the beginning and the ends, those determinate points numerically of the universe, right? That is the 3, 6, and 9. Of course, that also forms the triangle as well, right? So the 3, 6, and 9, and all of the other numbers, the Capricar sequence, the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, and of course ends on 1 as well. That's the Capricar sequence. But 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, the numbers that remain, those of course form the 2 hemispheres, right? Sort of squares at either side of that triangle. Again, it's essentially mirroring the sacred geometry inherent within the organ of the brain. The thalamus, the inner chamber, and of course the 2 hemispheres. Interestingly, the reverse primes, or the only 2 true reverse primes which multiplied together give us the Hebrew gematria value. And remember, Hebrew gematria is a thing, not necessarily in English, but certainly in Hebrew it's a thing, where Hebrew alphabet, or the alphabet, if you will, the letters are also used as numerals, right? So each letter stands for a certain value, hence gematria. Thus, the Hebrew gematria value of Genesis 1 is 2701, or 2701. That is comprised of 37 times 73, the only 2 true reverse primes. Again, 2701 adds to 10, right? Not 9 to 10, like 73 and 37. But interestingly, the numbers between 37 and 73, the value between that rather, is 36. So that's quite interesting. We see the 9 there again. So you see there the 3 and the 6, which add to 9. So of course the 10 is not necessarily a natural number, right? Of course it's a natural value. But as far as natural integers go, or the natural numbers, they go up to 9. 0 isn't factored in, that's a modern invention. So, or as far as values go, if you will, it goes from 1 to 9. The 10 is an abstraction. It is that which is both the on and the off, right? If you think of it in terms of binary, the 1 and the 0. 1 and 1, that produces the determinate, right? It produces the boundaries, the confines of existence. 1 and 0 do not. 1 and 0 produce a definitive beginning and a definitive end. 1 and 1 produce a beginning and an end that are the same, right? That are the same. It began with fire, ends with fire. It began with contraction. It shall end with contraction. So of course Horus gets revenge on Set, the murderer of his father Osiris. He is the resolution, right, between that conflict of Set and Osiris, the Green Lord of the Dead, right? Hence he is the resolution of the struggle between night and day, heaven and earth, restriction and generation, the desert and lush abundancy, right? Light and dark, and is the divine third of the severity of Osiris and Set, Aries and Taurus, and the generative or merciful symbol of Isis, Sirius, who seeks to piece together 14 pieces of her beloved. Horus is thus Orion. Orion is the falcon. Galahad Eridanus is a pseudonym that is representative of Orion at the birth point of the Eridanus, or is the resolution of the river that set forth out from Eden, eastward, where the great schism or differentiation of the pure potential first occurred. The tree of life diverged, like the Y, through the act of descent. The great Y, right? Why are we here? Right? that is the primary driver for man, and especially in terms of his acquisition of knowledge, his acquisition of self-fulfillment, right? That is the great why. The eating of the fruit of dualism from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Again, that idea of why are we here, right? Why is there good and evil? All of the whys, right? All of these sorts of bifurcative tangents is essentially indicative of the process of knowledge or acquiring knowledge, right? You have to take that path where you split your essence off, right? You go down one path, right, instead of going down the other to find knowledge, right? It's a 50-50 shot, if you will. The West, the land of the setting sun, shall conceive the dawn of a new world, and the sons of the West, the widow's son of Horus or the falcon, shall travel to the east seeking that which was lost, the padded room where nightmares become reality, and the dreams of a progressive future transmute into grotesque horrors of a paralysing night terror, will open its door to some and allow them to exit this gauntlet-like test. A baptism by fire shall take the place of water. Fire, the serpent of the light, shall eat away once again our chance of transcendence. The flame, the shackle of control, the frenzy, and the binding of the fire to the wick shall keep us dancing to the tune of the Leontocephaline until we realise our potential and exert our will. Of course, directly across from Aquarius is Leo the Lion. The clique which are above us have as their symbol, their tribal sigil, that of the lion, right? The devourer, that of Shiva. Again, once one goes over the rainbow, once one transcends cycles of destruction, of creative destruction, once one awakes from the dream, right? From the waking dream, then the revelation begins. Revelatio, or the piercing of the veil, from Latin. That is the point where the world ends and a new one begins. Once we understand, once we awake from the dream. It's very similar to the American dream. It is turned into a nightmare. And the threshold of pain will reach such a point, and like the dream, you will get that sensation of falling, and it will reach a point, it shall cross an event horizon, where the sensation of falling triggers an awakening within you, right? And that is when the dream will end, or the dream turned nightmare will end. Genesis and Revelation is this process, right? It is the beginning and the end. But one doesn't wake from the dream into reality. One merely awakes from the dream into another dream. It's very similar to the Matryoshka dolls, right? The Russian dolls, the nesting dolls, or the wheels within wheels within wheels. That is the structure of the cosmos. Until we find the primordial resolution of man's schizophrenic, or two-minded, and involuted condition, we shall be doomed to repeat the cycles of the world of the paradoxical pinball, the autopoietic double reflection, a negative feedback loop of eternal involution, seeking, in vain, its own evolution, yet failing to understand the wisdom that is the seeking of the endless horizon of evolution, the Faustian dream that belies a nightmare, that shall set them down the path of further involution and eternal repression in the world of forms and archetypes, and thinking they were wise, they thus became fools. The resolution of these forces that have diverged from the monad, or pure potential undifferentiated and unmanifested, establishes the true vision God has for man. Anything else will lead to self-destruction, as we see the most cataclysmic bifurcation in Western civilization is now occurring, even greater than the Protestant and Catholic 30 Years' War, and eventually it will grow into an inferno, the Western Civil War. Societies will implode, and by and large, it will result in a radical socio-political shift, the likes of which are unfathomable today. This is the Second Horseman.